We met at our favorite hangout.
Parkwood Avenue Church of God.
I met her one Sunday morning when I was in her Sunday school class. She was teaching. I was sitting on the back row. And boy, I thought she was gorgeous. And so I said to myself, I'm going to date that young lady. And so it took me a while to get up the nerve, but I called her. And when I called her, I wouldn't let her off the phone till she said yes. And she gave me a date. I remember that day.
And shall I tell you about the first date? We were going to have a program at church, and at that time it was called YPE. And I was in charge, and it was a Halloween, so it must have been the 31st of October, well, close around to that. And we were going to have a eating after at the church parsonage. Benny was working, and he was supposed to pick up something from downtown to bring it for the eat. I live behind the church, just a little piece in an apartment. And so it come time for me to get down there to take care of the program, and he wasn't there. So I had to walk off and leave him.
On the first date, she walked off and left me. But that's all right. I went on to the party anyway and got up with her. And after the party, we walked from the parsonage to her house. And I don't know where we held hands that day or not, but I tried to.
A lot of our dating, a lot of it was centered around church work because we were working before he went to Lee College, because we were working with the young people there at Parkwood Avenue.
I worked at Montaldo's before I went off to college. Montaldo's a ladies' dress shop. And I dressed the windows, and I liked to show off my work, but I really didn't do all the work. The man that was over it did the work, and I just handed him stuff. But you know how it is when you're out dating and walking the streets, you kind of exaggerate a little bit. And I'd take Doris down to the window and show her those windows I decorated, and we'd go down and look at the furs, and it was an expensive place. Sometimes dresses would cost $1,000. And I'd show Doris what I'd like to buy her and what I'd like to see her in. And it was a good experience just to do window shopping during those days. That brings us up another story. We came from poor side of the track, and when we would go downtown to eat, we would eat oftentimes a little steak. So we went into a steak and fish house one day in Charlotte and sat down, and there on the menu it said steak mackerel. And I looked at it and I said, hey Doris, I think I'll have this steak. And so I said, I want this steak mackerel. And Doris ordered her food, and when they brought it out, it was a fish. And I've learned about a steak mackerel fish from that experience.
That wasn't me. That was you. I knew what a mackerel was.
Oh, man. I can't, let's see, the first time I kissed her, you want me to tell you about that?
Do you remember that?
Honey, how could I forget?
I don't know, because I don't think I do.
I pecked her on the cheek. We'd sit on the porch and we'd talk. And one time I got nerve enough to reach over and hold her hand, and I pulled her head over to me and I kissed her on the cheek. That was my first kiss. All the time I was courting her, I was in high school. And then I went on to Lee College, and then there I pursued my education, and she stayed in Charlotte and worked, and I was in Cleveland, Tennessee. But we'd see each other pretty often because I'd come home every chance I got to visit with my sweetie. Hey, you remember that time you come to Lee College in the car? And we went out, we slipped out. You know, Lee College was a religious school and you couldn't hold hands even on campus. But we slipped out and went over there to the mountain. You remember that time?
Yeah, afraid to death we was going to get caught.
And we parked there at the mountain and talked, and then came back home, and the dean of the college was sitting there at the window, looking out the window when we came in, just laughing at us. We thought we were going to get kicked out of college, but he didn't.
You thought you were going to get
Yeah, but he didn't. He was nice to us. He just laughed about it. When I proposed to her, I got down on my knees, and she was sitting on the couch. And I said to her, Doris, how would you like to have your name on my tombstone?
You did not.
I did.
No, you did not.
Oh, I didn't say that.
No.
Excuse me.
But the one thing I can remember, because it must have been something was said about a ring. He must have asked me how I'd feel if he got me a ring. I told him I would feel insulted because I didn't wear rings and I didn't want him to get me a ring. And I felt like he should know that I didn't wear rings and that wasn't part of me.
And then I went down to her daddy's and asked him could I marry her. And we had a little chat. And so he consented.
And again, I think that was on a Halloween night because we rode the bus up to Kannapolis.
Oh, that's why he laughed. He thought it was a Halloween joke.
Maybe so.
I never could figure that out.
Maybe that's when you were supposed to ask Daddy and you chickened out and didn't do it. I don't, did you get down on your knees?
Oh yeah, I've been on my knees all my life.
I really can't draw that into my mind.
No, we were
something
sitting
there,
on the couch and I asked her, could I get her a ring? That was the way I approached it. And she said no, she didn't want a ring. And then it went from that to, will you marry me? And she said, I'll think about it.
I'll say I'll think about it.
Mm-hmm. And she said, I'll tell you later. And we dated. And she finally come around to say yes.
I think I guess from the time I was a teenager, I had ideas of the planning of what I'd like to have when I got married. So, but I couldn't do everything I wanted to do because at the time I chose to get married was April. And to get the material for the gowns was next to impossible, so I wanted organdy, and I wanted something, I thought a garden wedding would be pretty, but I still wanted to get married in a church. So I went to a lot of department stores to look at their material for gowns and finally decided on what I was going to have to do. And I chose different colors for the bridesmaids. And then they had great big, well, I couldn't find just the hat, so it had the brim, but then the inside of it, you could see the hair. They just carried an arm bouquet of gladiolus. My bouquet was a calla lily arm bouquet. Oh, and Benny was at college, so he got some of his college friends to be the men, ushers, and his roommate was chosen to help with the ceremony. And E.C. Thomas performed the ceremony. He had been our pastor. He'd been youth director of North Carolina before he was our pastor.
And the general overseer of church.
And then later on, he became the general overseer of the Churches of God.
Well, E.C. Thomas was the nearest a mentor that I guess I would have in my life. And he was a great man, and very humble, very loving, very kind, very generous. And that's why we chose him for the one to marry us. He was our pastor for several years.
I didn't say where we were married. We were married at what was then called the Elm Street Church of God in Kannapolis, North Carolina.
I remember that she was the most beautiful lady I'd ever seen. When she came down the aisle in the white and the veil over her face. I can believe what it must have been when Solomon saw the Queen of Sheba. She was so beautiful. And the most beautiful I ever seen her was that very day that she came down the aisle and dressed in a wedding dress.
And the first words he said to me after the wedding ceremony, and after we'd gone out of the church and was going around the church to come back in to have pictures made, where did you get that ungodly dress?
Now.
The biggest thing I remember is that I stumbled over the vowels. I couldn't say the word, I don't know whether I can say it now. Troth. I said troth. And then another thing about the wedding is the little girl that was going to be my flower girl. I'd have to do some calculating. I can't remember how old Debbie was at that time. I thought she was old enough, you know, and I thought she'd go down, but come time for her to go down the aisle, she did not want to go. And so finally, Debbie did walk down the aisle, but she walked down backwards, right at the end of my gown. She faced me and went down the aisle. The reception to the wedding was held at the fellowship building of the Midway Methodist Church there in Kannapolis. Another thing about the wedding and the reception, the cake was purchased in Charlotte. And so I had to transport it from Charlotte to Kannapolis. At that time, you didn't have things like they have now that you transport cakes, and it was already tiered together. It wasn't different tiers that you use the little palisters or things. So here this big cake had to sit in the back of my car, and I had to sit back there and hold it while somebody else was driving the car, and I thought it was going to go on the floor a couple of times. But we managed to get there, and it turned out pretty good. It was very pretty. Oh, you know, going back to that night of that wedding, some stupid boys, men, college kids, put something terrible in the car.
Sardines.
And it spotted my dress too. But it was horrible smelling, so that was one of the pranks that they played on it. And then they painted the car. And so Sunday morning, Benny, when we went over to Miss Black's, Benny washed it off.
And then in the afternoon, we got in the car and drove to Asheville, North Carolina, and spent the first night of our honeymoon in Asheville,
Well, the
North
first night
Carolina.
of the honeymoon, but the second night of marriage.
Yeah.
And we went to church on Sunday
We
night
went to church
at
at
the
West Asheville
Church of God.
which I pastored in later years. And then we drove on over into Tennessee and stopped at...
Well, we went up to Cherokee and went up because you didn't have the interstate then.
That's right.
So we went up Cherokee and then took the mountain road up into Knoxville.
We went through Gatlinburg, actually. Went over into Tennessee, and we stayed at a little motel over there in Sweetwater.
Well, first it was there at Knoxville, right outside
Yeah,
of Knoxville.
right, Knoxville. Yeah. And
On my way or something other like that. On my way, maybe that's what it was.
Actually, I was going back to school. I had to be back in school that week. So we were on our way back to the college, but we spent the night at several motels on the way. Well, I thought that was the wedding of the year there in Kannapolis that year.
Honey, that was the wedding of the century.
Our courtship just continued into our marriage. I was deeply in love with her before we got married, and that just followed over into our marriage, and it didn't, there didn't seem to be any lack of intensity of my love for her after marriage. And today I love her more right now than I did then, though I'd have to convince her. Now I'll tell you how I always handled our disagreements. I would look at her and say, "I love you, give me a kiss." And that's supposed to settle everything. Now she always told me that didn't settle everything, but it worked a lot of times.
Yeah.
Sort of like Miss Harding said when I asked her one day, "Well, how did you and Dave live together so long?" She said it took a lot of prayer and a lot of faith and trust. And I think that's it. That's the key to a successful marriage is to keep God first and then have faith and trust in each other.
And a lot of forgiveness.
A lot of forgiveness is there.
You've
Yeah,
got
a lot
to
of forgiveness,
forgive.
right. But truly, Doris has been a what I would call a most perfect wife.
Oh, mercy.
And she would be an example for any young lady to follow. I wish I could have been as strong in the faith and in forgiving and love that she has been.
The qualities, his ability to stand fast and do what the Lord asked him to do. and how to deal with people. And then just talk about a personal thing here. He always made me feel like that I was special to him. I never doubted his love. He just, in little things like maybe going and buying flowers, when I would say, "Ben Black, why did you do this? We need the money." Or getting a card and bringing it to me. And then his support to me, or his support of me, while Mother was living with us, and helping me with Mother, and you know, and saying, yes, we'll give her a home. And I appreciate that.
Qualities about your mother is she is a very virtuous woman. Her words are true. The very fact, if there's anybody in the world that I would trust, it would be your mother. She is one that I would trust explicitly, without any reservation. And that's saying a lot. She has been a wonderful mother, wife, friend, and lover. The truth is, Doris has always been my love, and my children have always been my joy. And that's how I can sum up my relationship with her and with my family. And I mean that truly. I love you.
I love you.
That's the bottom line.